We have a couple of new faces in here today, which is always exciting. But just by way of refresher, so to speak, we have an approach to this class where we want to examine what CRT says. Okay, so really since the end of October, what we've been doing is week by week looking at a different tenet of critical race theory. There are numerous core tenets. I've chosen 6. We're going to study the 6th one today. The point of this is that we might get familiar with what CRT actually says. That's the first point, because I don't think you can properly and honestly evaluate anything until you know what it actually says. And then the second point of this phase, where we're getting acquainted with CRT, man, who put that there? Is what? What was it? The sun just blasted it out of my mind. What was the second point? Why CRT was so important? What the Bible says. Yeah, we're getting to that. That's coming up in 2 weeks. But you're right on track with me. Oh, that's going to bug me now. Anyway, so that's our first phase, is we're getting to know what CRT actually says. And then, secondly, we are going to do a biblical evaluation of critical race theory. So if you've been with us for the last several months, you may notice that we've not had a whole lot of Bible, okay? And that's by design, because we are getting acquainted with what CRT actually says. Now, starting, not next week, but the week after, we're going to begin a very rigorous biblical examination. So you're like, I want to know, what does the Bible say about these things? We're going to get very, very... we're going to roll our sleeves up and we're going to get into it. There's going to be a ton of Bible, there's going to be a ton of explanation of Scripture, and then using that as the lens to look at all these things that we've been learning for the last few months. So why 2 weeks from now, you're asking? Because next week is our fasting and praying time, because it's our congregational meeting, quarterly meeting. So during this time next week, we'll be fasting and praying. So if you're coming next week ready for CRT, you're not going to be fed. And that'll be by design, because you're supposed to be fasting. No, kidding. Okay, so critical race theory. What have we been learning so far? We've been examining 6 core tenets. The first one is that racism is everywhere. Anytime you hear systemic racism, or racism is embedded in our society, or that it's baked into our systems and our institutions, there's no getting away from it. Racism is everywhere all the time. You're hearing the first and most core tenet of critical race theory. This is the notion, this is the idea, this is the belief that there is nothing in our society that happens that does not happen because of racism. Okay? Everything is caused by racism. It is the total explanation for all phenomena within a society, within our society. Okay? So that's the first tenet. Well, logically then, it moves to the next tenet. It moves to the second tenet up there, which is racism is hidden. You're like, well, how can it be everywhere but then be hidden? Well, that's the beauty of CRT, is it is hidden to the majority culture, that is white, evangelical, especially men, especially cisgender, straight, heterosexual men. They're blind to the racism. Whites are blind to all the racism in our society. Why are they blind to it? Well, because in this society, whiteness is rightness, is what CRT says. The accusation is that if something isn't white, something isn't right. What is normal, what is everyday, what is just simply, hey, this is the way the world is determined by what white culture says it is. Okay, so if you're black, or you're a person of color, or you're an indigenous person, or something like that, then you live on the outside. You live on what's called the margins of society, and you're on the out, you're not on the in. And so therefore, people who live every day as white people just think that the way the world is, the way society is just normal. There's nothing, we don't see how the structures and the institutions disfavor marginalized people, because the institutions and systems and structures favor us. And so therefore, we're blind to the way in which it oppresses marginalized people. Therefore, the third tenet of, why do I keep doing that? The third tenet is lived experiences become prioritized. So in other words, if the goal of critical race theory, and all critical theory for that matter, okay, Critical race theory is one subset of a discipline called critical theory. It's a Marxist academic discipline, okay? Critical theory, it means to basically just criticize society, to show where the oppression is so that you can begin to dismantle and disrupt that oppression. Why? Because ultimately it's a slow-moving disintegration through critical theory disciplines to disintegrate American Western society, okay? So critical race theory is one of those critical theory subsets. And what does it seek to do? It seeks to show where racism exists in our society. It's everywhere, but since white people are blind to it, who's not blind to it? Who sees it real clear? The oppressed. The marginalized, the people who constantly live every day with racism. You'll hear that kind of language all the time. I live every day with racism. I'm sick of explaining how racism affects me every single day. And so what you have is therefore, CRT says we are not going to listen to statistics or logic or science, so to speak. We're going to listen to the marginalized voices. We're going to listen to their stories. We're going to listen to their subjective perceptions based on the experiences that they've had in their everyday lives and the way that they have to live with racism every day. Because they have a special sight. They can see clearly into society. Okay, so that therefore, if we want to know what truth is, what the true truth is about our society, we have to listen to people on the margins. This is straight up postmodernism. You can go back to the class, the recording that I did on our website. You can watch the video again where we talked about lived experiences. This is straight postmodernism. Postmodernism says that nobody can really ascertain what true objective truth is. All you have are people in their own little context, their own little corners of the world, and they're colored by their lenses which they look at the world through are colored by their context. You have people of color over here, you have white people over here, you have straight people over here, you have all these, nobody really is touching real truth, objective truth. Everybody thinks they are, but nobody really is. That's postmodernism. So, when you can't really touch what is objectively true, it becomes a power play. Every group is vying for power in society. Every group is trying to assert their narrative, their story, their view of what is true on everybody else. Speak truth to what? Power. Okay? It's not discover and find what is objectively true. It is you speak what you feel and think is true so that you can therefore achieve and attain power. That's what that means. Okay? That's what it's being applied in the race relations within society is white people are clueless to the truth of racism, and so therefore we're dependent upon black and people of color and indigenous people to tell us the way in which our systems in society is actually racist. That's not just politically and socially, that's biblically. There is a full-on assault right now, a full-on assault. You may or may not be aware of it, but there is a full-on assault of CRT progressive Christians. The old school would call them deconstructionists, which is what they are, okay? These people, what they're doing is they're trying to dismantle the notion that there is a way in which we can find biblical truth that is objective and true for everybody. In other words, the way Jonathan Edwards interpreted the Bible was fine for his time. The way that Augustine interpreted the Bible was fine for his time, but he didn't actually find true truth in the Bible that is true for every Christian in every age, everywhere around the world. So what does that mean? It means if you want fresh, updated understanding of what God's Word says, you need priests, a new cast of priests, a new cast of prophets, a new cast of teachers and so forth to tell you what the Bible means. There's a whole movement to say by sociologists, never trust a sociologist when they talk theology. That's a good rule to live by. Never trust a sociologist when they talk about theology. Trust a chemist. Anybody get that? That's Neil Shenvi. Neil Shenvi is a chemist, and he's a fantastic resource if you want to know this. But there's a ton of sociologists writing books and papers and so forth, trying to show you that you need to listen, that really your beliefs about the Bible right now, all of you here right now, your beliefs are not actually connected with anything objectively true. They're just culturally determined. You live in this sort of culture right here, therefore this culture is the soil in which your beliefs have grown up out of, and you don't think that you have touched anything that is absolutely true. Race is not biological. That's number 4. We agree with that. Race is a social construct. There's no genetic scientific proof that people of color and whites and so forth and blacks are all somehow biologically different as humans. 5th, interlocking systems of oppression is what we looked at last time. And interlocking systems of oppression says this, very basic. CRT is not merely about race. We looked at intersectionality last time. We looked at LGBTQ and so forth. CRT says, hey, look, guys, blacks, you guys are one group of oppressed people. Women, you're another group of oppressed people. LGBTQ, you're another group of oppressed people. Muslims, non-Christians, you're another group of oppressed people. Okay? Handicap, overweight, you are all also oppressed people. So therefore, what do we need to do? CRT advocates this. Do not miss this point. This is fundamentally important. We all need to come together and be a coalition of the oppressed, and together overthrow the oppressor. Dismantle this oppressive system that oppresses us. So what does that mean? It means that your Christian friend, or your Christian kid, or your Christian neighbor, or your pastor, or your teacher at your Christian school who says, we're going to take up critical race theory, we're going to take up racial reconciliation today, tomorrow we'll be supporting LGBTQ. Because they all interlock. All these oppressed groups are interlocked together. What unites all of them? Who is their common enemy? The oppressor. Okay? Keep that in mind. Your tool is always oppressor and oppressed. Power. Oppressor and oppressed. Power. That's your tool. We'll get to that here. Now, history needs retelling. Use your tool. Power. Oppressor and oppressed. Whoever has power gets to tell our nation's history. Whoever tells our nation's history has power. Because remember, we're not trying to find actual truth. It's a postmodern belief, CRT. There is no access to true, real truth. Therefore, all we have is our subjective views. And if all we have are our subjective views, whose subjective view is going to be dominant in society? Right? That's what this is. And don't think that the church is insulated from this. Like I just said, there's a ton. Well, I'll show you actually. We're going to walk you through this. CRT says the full story of American history, and church history for that matter, has not been told and needs to be told. Those with power control the narrative of our history so that they can maintain their power. This is called hegemonic power, hegemony. Okay? What is the set of ideas embedded in our culture and our thinking collectively as a society that says this is right and this is wrong? This is the way things are, this is the way things shouldn't be. This is normal, this is abnormal. What is that? That's hegemony. Whose hegemony rules in society? Whose ideas about right and wrong rule in society? Again, there's no absolute right or wrong, so it's just more of a Darwinian power struggle. A culturally Darwinian power struggle. Whose ideas? Make no mistake, that's what they're doing. So history needs retelling. Devin Carbado, professor of law and African studies at UCLA. He wrote the book, Critical What? Okay? He says, historically, racism has been constitutive of, rather than oppositional to, American democracy. Racism was built into the constitutional architecture of American democracy. Goes on, quotes someone, then at the end he says, the lingering effects of this foundational moment, that is the establishment of our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence and so forth, the lingering effects, okay, or the ongoing relationship between racial inequality and American democracy is precisely what Gunnar Myrdal referred to as an American dilemma. Okay, that's a mouthful. What are we saying? This is one of the academic sources. This guy's a lawyer, expert in CRT, writes books on CRT, okay? Because remember, that's only where CRT exists. Lawyers in law school studying in libraries the theory of CRT. That's where it only exists. Okay, here's a guy in that library with his glasses. No, he doesn't have his glasses on. Only smart people wear glasses. See that? Only smart people wear glasses. Okay? Notice what he's saying. Historically, racism. Racism was built into the constitutional architecture of American democracy and Constitution. I hate how they keep using the word democracy. What are we? Thank you. Constitutional republic, okay? So, what are, democracy is a loaded word, by the way. It's a very, very loaded word, okay? To the social justice warrior. What is he saying? He's saying that racism is what our country is built on historically, okay? And we need to tell that story more faithfully. History needs retelling. Words That Wound, very popular book by, these are like your apostles, the foundation of CRT. Matsuda and Lawrence, Delgado and Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term critical race theory, okay? Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, I think actually, not critical race theory, but intersectionality. Okay, what do they say? They say critical race theory challenges ahistoricism and insists on a contextual historical analysis of the law. Ahistoricism, what does that mean? It means that what happened in the past happened in the past and it has no lingering and extending effects into the future. CRT says that's wrong. What happened in the past has determined the future that we live in right now. History matters, and it needs to be retold. Current inequalities, social institutional practices are linked to earlier periods in which the intent and cultural meaning of such practices were clear. Our history calls for this presumption. Okay? Very strong focus on history. The 1619 Project. Nobody's heard of that, right? Let's get introduced to it. The 1619 Project. We have Nicole Hannah-Jones in 2019. This was her idea, the 1619 Project. 2019, it was to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the first slaves arriving on American soil. It's a New York Times Magazine project. She won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her essay that she contributed to the 1619 Project. I read her essay. I highly encourage you to read it. It's good reading, actually. What is the point of bringing 1619 Project up? It says, if you go to their website, the front page, in August of 1619, a ship appeared on this horizon near Point Comfort, a coastal port in the English colony of Virginia. It carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold to the colonists. No aspect of the country that would be formed here has been untouched by the years of slavery that followed. In the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell our story truthfully. Okay? I don't have a whole lot to argue with that. I mean, the history that's being talked about there actually isn't untrue. I do contend with the idea that our history hasn't been told truthfully. I've read probably 8 biographies of 8 founding fathers, and that issue gets tons and tons and tons of attention in those every single one of those biographies. The issue of slavery. Okay, on their website, you notice the yellow circle there. Reframe the country's history. Okay. Okay. What do you mean? The goal of the 1619 Project, this is from her essay and from the website, the goal of the 1619 Project is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619 as our nation's birth year. See that? As opposed to what year? 1776. Do you see the significance of that? The significance is this. In 1619, the first slaves that ever stepped foot on this country, in this land, okay, were delivered. And the symbolism of making that our birth year means that racism is what this country is built on, what made this country great, and therefore everything that this country has been built into needs to be torn down in order to establish, or in order to eradicate racism. Don't think for a moment that this is not a full-on deconstruction of American society. Does American society depend on slavery? Does the success? No. Does the, well, let's keep reading. American history cannot be told truthfully. See that point? It's not being told truthfully without a clear vision of how inhuman and immoral the treatment of black Americans has been. I agree with that. Have you ever read, I read James Cone's Black Liberation Theology book, the Cross and the Lynching Tree. He's a total heretic. But when he takes the time to describe the lynching era, post-Civil War to Civil Rights era, okay? When he describes the lynching era, 5,000 blacks were lynched. It is the most awful thing you've ever, he will tear your heart out and throw it on the ground. It's so awful what was done to people, okay? Have we progressed from that? Do we still lynch? Do we still do that? Has there been any progression? Okay? So that's, by acknowledging this shameful history, by trying hard to understand its powerful influence on the present, perhaps we can prepare ourselves for a more just future. Okay. Here's the point that's going on with CRT. Remember, what is it all about? What's the one word that describes what CRT is all about? Starts with P, power. Okay? Is this just merely about saying, hey, America, you need to acknowledge and own up to what happened in the past? Is it merely just that? No, it's not. It's not. If it were, I could be all on board with that. Wherever we fail, wherever we try and hide that ugly past, I could be with a CRTist and say, we need to show that. But that's not what CRT is about. They don't end there. It's not about, here's the key. America has the best ideals and principles and foundation that any nation has ever been built on. Ever. We do not live up to it perfectly. But do you remember what it says? In order to form a more perfect union. Not a perfect, but a more perfect. And this country its aims and its thrust has been to achieve those ideals better today than it did yesterday, and better tomorrow than it does today. That's the point. What CRT wants to do, understand this, wants to expose the ways in which America has failed to live out fully those ideals and principles in order to do away with those ideals and principles and establish a society built on a whole other set of ideas and principles and a foundation of what's right and what's wrong, okay? It's a whole, they're trying to dismantle it, not to make it better, but to replace it. That's why we can't. That's why I can't. Joy Reid says, education is, quote, code for white parents that don't like the idea about teaching about race. 1619 project and CRT being pushed into so many schools around the country. And if anybody opposes it, it's because they are white supremacists, they are racists, and they want to continue to maintain their power and the status quo in society. That's the explanation. If you oppose CRT in classrooms, which they say isn't being taught in classrooms, but if you oppose it, you're a racist. And you want white supremacy to continue to be supreme. Tony Kinnett, he's part of the administration for the largest school district in Indiana. He says, as an admin for the largest school district in Indiana, this was back in November, he put this video out, here's what we mean when we tell you that we aren't teaching critical race theory. And he goes on to put out a video, and you're like, they just... Kinnett, Kinnett. I can send you all these PowerPoint slides if you want, Donna. If you want those, because there's a ton here. So this guy, and then he goes on, and he shows this video about how they just straight up lie. And he points out, notice the arrows I got here and underlined. He says, yes, we told principals at the beginning of the year to lie to parents and tell them that we weren't using CRT in schools. And yes, we continue to lie. This is what he tweeted out. Now you have 4 pictures here. If you might be a little overstimulated with all the visuals, but these 4 pictures, what he lays out is, number 1, he lays out from the superintendent of the school district an email to principals saying, if you have any questions from parents or people in the community asking about what we're teaching, he says, tell them, no, we're not teaching it. He said, if they continue to ask and all of this, tell them they can talk to us and then we'll handle it. And then he goes and shows all the resources that are sent to all those principals and schools and those teachers. And it's straight up, word for word, right out of Kimberly Crenshaw, right out of Robin DiAngelo, right out of Ibram Kendi, right out of just straight critical race theory being taught in the schools. What they mean is, they're not making high schoolers go through a class called critical race theory. They're not making them go through a 10 a.m. Sunday morning study called Examining Critical Race Theory, where the title of the class has critical race theory in it. What they do is they weave the concepts in. The videos the kids have to watch, the exercises and lessons that they have to do, the worksheets they have to go through, have all the principles and all the language of critical race theory blatantly in it. But they're not teaching it because it's not actually a class that they can elect to be part of. It's forced on them in the classrooms as it becomes baked into the curriculum that the kids are partaking in or participating in. The EFCA, anybody know the EFCA? That's us. For me, our country's history and present reality of racial division is not primarily an issue of justice or mere equality. It is the test for the EFCA's mission statement. Can you turn that off a second? The lack of spine right now is killing me. Despite the avalanche of historical evidence about the role race has and continues to play in causing disparities in our society. Alvin Sanders, Why Care About Ferguson? Back in 2015, he wrote this. Who's Alvin Sanders? He's the EFCA's All People's Initiative Director for 9 years, from 2007 to 2015. Alvin Sanders, writing about Ferguson. What are they doing? When Ferguson came out, okay, when Officer, was it Darren Williams, shot Michael Brown, right? The EFCA was part of the whole movement that just jumped on the bandwagon to write articles about, oh, look at how racist our society is. Look at Darren Williams. He's racist. He's a racist cop. Cops are always killing black people. Oh, then it came out later. The facts came out later. Do you remember that? What were the facts? All the things that they said that happened didn't happen. He wasn't shot in the back. Michael Brown was shot in the front. Michael Brown attacked the officer. Obama's Justice Department, led by Eric Holder, confirmed that there was no wrongdoing by Darren Wilson in his shooting and killing Michael Brown. Did the EFCA, along with the mainstream media or anybody, ever go back and retract the slander of Darren Williams? I know I'm getting his name wrong, I think. Did they ever go back and retract? Did they ever go write a correction article and say, hey, we were wrong? No. Just like the Gospel Coalition wrote an article last year, Why I Hate August, and an author wrote, I'm so tired. It was after the George Floyd thing. That was a year and a half ago, not last summer. In August of 2020, an article came out through the Gospel Coalition, said why I hate August, and he went on and on and on about using the George Floyd incident as proof of systemic racism and cops killing black people in an exorbitant amount of numbers and totally unfair and blah, blah, blah. And he's going on about the systemic racism. Okay? And then, no, it was that, and it was Kyle Rittenhouse. It was the Rittenhouse thing. Because Rittenhouse had shot those guys, and then we just had, and it was because of Rittenhouse. This guy wrote this article talking about how this white kid gets to go shoot people. And he's like, I hate how white supremacy rules. And this is Gospel Coalition. And then there has been this huge movement, this backlash against the Gospel Coalition ever since Rittenhouse was acquitted. You going to write a correction article? Nope. They just move on, just like the mainstream media. Will lie. Here's the thing. Lies, who said this? I think it was Edmund Burke said, lies will run the world over 3 or 4 times before truth ever even gets out of the house. See that? If you can get that lie out there and push it 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 as hard as you can, it just becomes embedded in people's minds and their perspectives. And then later, the truth actually, which takes some work and some time, gets out. People just go, whatever. We've already determined what's true. Postmodernism. There's no real truth. That's why Jussie Smollett. People wouldn't go, oh, okay, Jussie, there's real racism, but you're, like the only guy I think who was saying that was, what's that black comedian that's in Hot Water? Chappelle. Chappelle was like the only one saying anything about Smollett. Anyway, LATASHA Morrison, Be the Bridge. I didn't know who this lady, anybody know who LATASHA Morrison is? I didn't either. But so the EFCA put her article out a couple of years back. She's the author of a book called Be the Bridge. She's the director and founder of a ministry called Be the Bridge. Straight up critical race theory. This woman was on staff at an EFCA church in Texas. Not anymore, because this ministry has taken off. I guess it's like the hottest thing out there. And I'll tell you what, I taught some EFCA pastors that we've been meeting, and I taught some EFCA pastors, did a profile on LATASHA Morrison. And when I did a profile on her and I was studying her, I was like, oh my goodness, this woman is not about the gospel and the Great Commission. This woman is straight up critical race theory. And I mean, in your face, condescending, manipulative. It's incredible. So you got the church. And tons of churches are implementing her book, Be the Bridge. Tons of churches are sending people to her seminars and to her, sending them through the whiteness intensive. The fact is, history has been erased, hijacked, whitewashed, and skewed. What's it saying about history? You need to retell history because it's been hijacked. We have to set that right with truth-telling. That's where we start. A lot of people coming to the bridge are coming with a lot of misinformation related to history because we don't have the same common memory or understanding of history or shared understanding of history. This is all in her whiteness intensive. Costs money, but it's 8 classes that will help you be a better anti-racist. Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Wouldn't be surprised at all. Donna said, is she a part of Calvin's January series? And I wouldn't doubt it at all, the way Calvin goes. I wouldn't doubt it at all. Okay, so I listened to her lecture at Mark Batterson's church. Mark Batterson, anybody know Mark Batterson? Circle maker? Yeah. Mark Batterson. Okay, first of all, Mark Batterson, and then second of all, Mark, you're bringing... It's just so many, get the red pen out. She said, quote, we must teach the generation about our shared past. She said, quote, historical truth is essential to reconciliation. Quote, it's a story we're all a part of. That's important. I put that in there because the reason is because you as a white Christian need to understand that you are very and intricately connected to the past of white evangelicals who oppressed blacks. You see, you can't be divorced from them in the past. You're just as guilty of what happened. Okay? You're just as guilty because you're white. If we're not starting from the same common memory, it creates a barrier. Here's the thing. See, I don't know if I should add all this in here. This is like me brain dumping last night and these... Okay, I'm going to go through it. CRT does not aim to make America more faithful to its founding ideals. It rejects them. It does not hope to make America merely acknowledge its original sin and then better secure those, quote, inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. Instead, it aims to wholly restructure our society on different principles. We are in complete agreement that we need to study and know the awful history of slavery and racism this country is guilty of. However, in that effort, we ought to be aiming at, 1, acknowledge and appreciate the tremendous progress away from that past. If it cannot be meaningfully appreciated and acknowledged, the progress in this country, I have no room for dialogue for someone. Because we are in an unbelievably different place today than we were 100 years ago and 200 years ago. Okay? And then secondly, make us better understand, appreciate, and fulfill the very ideals that form the bedrock of this nation. That should be the study, that should be the goal of any study about slavery and racism. If CRT, the 1609 Project, et al. Were trying to do this, we could join effort. However, retelling our history aims at the larger goal of reinventing our society on social justice, Marxist ideals. Instead, we will honestly face the past, humbly learn from it, and chart a more faithful course towards our founding ideals as a nation. That sounds a lot better to me. What is said of our nation is also said of the church. So this is not just political and social. CRT Christians seek to expose the oppressive, exploitative, manipulative, misogynist history of the church. White evangelical theology has been and continues to be a dangerous discourse for society. The social justice warrior, woke church must seize the power of narrative telling from white theologians who further white theology for their own advantage. It's a mouthful, isn't it? It's a mouthful. It's about power. Remember, it's always about one thing. Darn it, I blew it. It's about one thing. I was going to leave you hanging on that slide, and I already gave you the answer. It's about power. Remember our tool. Oppressor and oppressed. Next time, 2 weeks from now, a thorough biblical examination of CRT's teachings, values, and ethics. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Test everything. And so exactly what we're going to do, okay? So just as we have been very rigorous and thorough in the language and the concepts and the teachings of CRT, now we're going to take the scriptures and we're going to pour it like a hose over this thing and see how it stands, okay? Any questions? I'll take 2, maybe 3, depending on how long the questions and the answers have to be. Sandy.
So I don't have a question. I just want to note that this, I mean, you probably already said it many times, but this is overtaking like every aspect of American civilization, if not the world. And it's very prevalent in Ottawa County, obviously in our schools. We're constantly, parents going to school boards fighting and stuff, but also in our county government with our county commissioners. They have bought into CRT. They have written statements about facing equality with equity. And, well, they haven't done that, but they've written statements about acknowledging that our form of government has systemic racism built into it. And they're constantly pushing equity through our DEI department. So that's a good reason to be involved in civics and understand that when we elect county commissioners or even school board members, we really need to know who we're voting for. So I just want to, and they are, we have 10 Republicans on our county commission board in Ottawa County, and almost all of them have brought this in.
It's true. I'm trying to find, I had a ton of quotes from the Grand Haven Area Public Schools, for instance, we were using. We had actually a lot of quotes from the letter that they wrote where they were establishing it, and they are actually saying equity. Equity, they are establishing it in the letter and then in all the training materials. So you're right. Yeah.
Very pervasive in churches in our communities. Very, very pervasive.
Is it?
Yes.
I'm telling you, we're going to find out why that's a problem when we when we get together in 2 weeks. But I have a whole list I've been keeping of all the problems with CRT, and so when I get all the slides together in the next few weeks and we start going through, it'll take us probably, I'm guessing, 2, maybe 3 weeks, which means 6, maybe 8 weeks. Okay. No, but you can't let the camel in. You can't let his nose in. Okay, you can't. It's a whole other worldview. Okay, anyone got one question or short comment? Yeah? David. When we're all done, am I going to tell you the answer? Is CRT right or wrong? Is that what you're asking?
We know it's wrong, but what's good, what's not.
Right. So definitely when we get together starting in 2 weeks, so the next phase of our study will be using the Bible to examine all the stuff we've been learning about it, and then seeing, okay, there may be some valid points in there, some important things that are true, but then it's what's done with that information, and then how truth, and then what are the dangers of the views, the teachings, the ethics even, because there's a whole other moral standard involved with this. And so we're gonna look at it, and then we're gonna see, on the whole, it needs to be rejected. There is a better way to view the problems that are raised by CRT, and yeah, you're gonna have to stick around for that. So I know you're itching to go to another church, but you got to stay here to find out what that answer is going to be. Okay. With that, let's pause and we'll have a break here, and then we'll get together for worship in just a few minutes. So let me pray. Father in heaven, Lord, as we gather as the people of God, and as we open your word, it is our prayer that we are open to it. That, Lord, you wash and cleanse us, that you guide us with the light of its truth. And that, Father, more than anything, we would love you with all our heart, all our soul, all our strength, and all our mind. And that in doing so, God, we today would be more conformed into the image of Jesus Christ than we were yesterday. And that, Father, together we find the encouragement from one another, the love in the body of Christ, Lord, and the spurring on for just being in each other's presence. God, may we fix our eyes on Christ, on truth, and may you sanctify us by your truth, even so, as we continue to seek it. In Jesus' name, amen.